pleasure to welcome all the very important personality, the VIP guest speaker that have been invited to this affordable housing crisis webinar discussion. My name is Festus Adebayo, and I'll be your moderator. And it's my pleasure to introduce my very important guest speakers for this discussion. I have with me Professor Olubenga Nubi Timothy, a professor of housing at the University of Lagos. He will be looking at the issue of the crisis in perspective before and during the pandemic. He will also look at the building institutions for housing delivery, physical, legal, and fiscal infrastructure. How do we go beyond investment to attain impact in the housing sector? It's also my pleasure to have Architect Jumoke Akinwumi, a former special advisor to the governor of Ogun State and a former chief executive of Ogun State Housing Corporation. It's my pleasure to have you. Architect Jumoke will be looking at the issue of housing sector. Also with me on the webinar is the immediate past president of Real Estate Developer Association of Nigeria, Reverend Savio Ugochukwu Shime. We will be looking at the issue of appraising existing institutions, structures, interface, transaction, dynamics, among others. I also have here the pioneer chief executive of Nigerian Mortgage Refinance Company, in person of our own dynamic Professor Charles Iyangete. We are happy to have you on the panel. His focus will be on what are the practical funding solutions suitable for affordable housing delivery, among others. It's also my pleasure to introduce on the panel our very passionate chief executive of Shelter Afrique, Mr. Andrew Sipadan. The chief executive of Shelter Afrique is also part of the panel, and we'll be discussing the issue: how are we meeting the United Nations standard for adequate housing? Role of DFIs in supporting affordable housing delivery. What have we learned from COVID-19 and the housing crisis? What must we do differently? That is Mr. Andrew Sipadan. Then I have my own brother, very agile and very innovative, Akim Oguniro. The founder of Ezimia Reality is also with us on the panel. He will be looking at the issue of the crisis in perspective. He will also be dealing with institutional and regulatory constraints. What do we need to do differently at this very crucial time? These are the issues for today. And finally, on the list of the panelists, our own president of the Real Estate Developers Association of Nigeria, Alhaji Aliyu Wamako. We will be looking at the issue of post-COVID-19. How should the private sector respond to fulfilling the affordable housing demand? What is the role of government in providing affordable housing? That will be handled by the president of REDA. I can see you there. Now, we also have our own Femi Adewale, an international affordable housing finance expert. Femi Adewale will be looking at the issue of imperatives for successful housing intervention program. What do you consider to be the future of housing COVID-19? Key drivers of affordable housing, lessons from other jurisdictions. We know Femi has been everywhere, so he should be able to share his experience on this program. So it's my pleasure to welcome all of you. I also want to welcome all the participants from all over the world. I can see about 200-something people already connected. We welcome all of you.
From US.
Now, we want to start the program. The first speaker for today will be no other person than Professor Charles Iyangete, you just have, for your first interactive discussion with us, you just have 4 minutes to start. Thank you. Up to you. Now, Professor Iyangete, you are welcome.
Thank you, moderator. I'll go straight to the point, and thank you for the invitation to this. To my mind, now is not the time to retreat to a sectional approach to the fight against COVID-19. We need a coordinated national strategic response. I acknowledge the Economic Sustainability Committee chaired by the Vice President. Inequality in our country means that many do not have the ability to meet the pronouncements to combat COVID-19. I'm now speaking about some 200 million people having to be on lockdown, social distancing, frequent washing of hands. For many, that's a price too high to pay. There's a big lesson for us in building strong society. Our people need to be involved and participate in crafting solutions. We must end the era of imposed policies, whether it's for housing, public health, whatever. Now is the time for resolute, proactive, and decisive leadership. We need a coordinated response. We need the public and the private sector to come together to craft this response. What is the way forward? And I'm going to limit myself on the way forward to financing solutions. The way forward, to my mind, needs a radical, bold steps to deal with the new world post-COVID-19. The radical and practical, perhaps even controversial step that I would propose is something that would address what we really are in, which is we are at war. We are at war, and a post-war solution is what is required. Funding is critical to fighting that battle in order to win the war. And so, in my mind, what we need is to turn our war against corruption on its head. Let me ask, what is the amount of funds that are looted? Who knows? Some estimate, is it 100 billion? If so, it's 40 trillion. That's 4 times our budget. Twice, more than twice our current reserves. Is it 50 billion? That's twice our initial budget for 2020, about 20 trillion. And so my proposal is a radical one, is to have amnesty under very stringent conditions for a limited period. And for that amnesty, I propose the issue of a post-pandemic rehabilitation and reconstruction bond. That bond would be a private placement. It only would apply to those involved. And so the proceeds of those who choose to accept the amnesty would go into this irredeemable bond. Not irredeemable. You would not be able to redeem it. It would run forever. It would carry a 0 coupon. If at all it carries any coupon, it must be small of the order that it would have cost to recover this money. It can be in multi-currencies. It ought to be in multi-currencies because the funds are in different currencies. And so it would be able to pool all of the funds that are out there and bring them back home and be available for the uses would be to build our social infrastructure, to build social housing primarily. And I'm not talking about just buildings in the way that we've been used to. In a new order where we have mobility of the services being provided, where we have a different kind of market structure to housing. And perhaps I'll get a chance to come back to that later on. What would be the role of our agencies? They'll be repurposed and refocused on tracing and monitoring compliance with this amnesty. They would, of course, continue with their job of pursuing those who choose not to accept the amnesty.
Try to round up.
Sorry? What would be the outcome of this? We'll have a transparent process that levels the playing field. Every case, offender is treated the same. The funds recovered would remain in the currency it was recovered from and would be placed in the same currency. The bonds issued would be in the same currency. We would have a permanent record of that. Why am I proposing this? This, to my mind, is one of the largest pool of funds, if indeed the numbers we're told turn out to be true, that can be accessed to drive the post-COVID rehabilitation. The funds released would then go into driving economic activity. Let's look at the market. Well, the market of post-COVID-19 will be different. The capital market would no longer be the way it is. We would have capital market options that are be very limited in the current context. So securitization, something which I had signed $1 billion deal in my old job, would no longer be feasible. The risks and uncertainties are at the highest levels. And so,
Prof, try to round up. Try to round up now. Try to round up.
Are captured. Our institutions, more precisely, are captured. And so we need to make a change from the current approach. The same group of people have captured our institution, whether it's of old or new type, and we need to change the process of engaging the heads of our institutions. We should open up to transparent processes, whether it's for heads or for board members of those institutions. This would mitigate the overbearing approach that is currently the case. And so much needs to change going forward. And in terms of the institution to run this, I have in the past, and this is nothing new, proposed a housing commission to serve as a coordinating role. And that would have the role of evolving the policies, including social housing, evolving the economic model for housing, monitoring and evaluating housing performance going forward. These are my preliminary submissions, Mr. Moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Charles Iyangete. You have done very well, even though you have spent beyond the required time. We sincerely appreciate your contributions. You have made a lot of points on this platform this morning. Let me use this opportunity to acknowledge to all the speakers and the participants that this webinar discussion is being monitored by AIT and the TVC and a few of our partners in the newspaper, Guardian, Punch, Business Day, Telegraph are monitoring this report. So most of the decisions here are going to be in the various media platforms. At this point, I would like to invite, so that we can settle the professors in our midst, I would now like to invite Professor Timothy Nubi to please make his presentation, first presentation within 4 minutes. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure being with us, and I'm grateful for your invitation. I appreciate your invitation. Thank you so much. Post-COVID-19 housing experience in Nigeria. Well, I appreciate the submission of Professor Iyangete and his conclusion by making reference to institution. I'll come back to that because we usually say in our own background here, as the last count yesterday, 38% of the victims, they belong to this minority group, the Black and the Asians. So the question they were not asking yesterday, why? These people constitute just 30% of the group of the population, but 38% were victims of this COVID-19. And the analysis was that the environment where they live in, the crowded environment of the Blacks, of the Asians in UK, which allow for spread of this contagious. So the issue of housing and epidemic outbreak, which COVID-19 is not the end of it, is it calls for proper, after this, we need to go back and redevelop our housing sector. And like I was asked to do, the background to the house problem is dated back to about 7 decades ago, about 70 years ago. In national development, where the rural urban areas were preferred and favored in terms of economic and social physical development than the rural area, that made massive migration to the urban area. The consequence of the migration is what we are facing today: poverty in the rural area, overcrowding in the urban area, that has led to the growth of private cities. There's overpopulation in the cities. Lagos is 20 million today, and the projection by the United Nations is that by 2030, we'll be about the 3rd largest city in the world, or by 2050. There's stress on urban infrastructure, including housing. There's acute shortage of infrastructure, including housing, for this massive and teeming population. Emergency of growth of slums and sprawl. And well, that's our experience today. 70% of our cities space, they are slum. And there are attempts in the past to resolve this problem. But we found out that most of our solutions in the past were focused on the minority, the formal sector, the working minority that doesn't constitute the majority of this country. And we see that in this lockdown experience, that majority that were living in the slums of Lagos, they could not be locked down. We see the adherence to the lockdown and the guideline adhered to in the plant area. Several efforts have been made in the past. Establishment of organizations like FHA, institutions like FHA, NIBRI, Red family homes, and as recently. But unfortunately, these are institutions that in other parts of the world that were not in this infrastructure, both the legal, the fiscal, and the fiscal infrastructure. But unfortunately, there are still more. Like most of our emphasis in the country today, we always focus on the physical infrastructure. No road, no water, no this and that. But housing requires more than that. As far back as 60 years ago, late Foshinebe told us that their committee recommended 25 laws to the federal government that were to be passed in the National Assembly. Laws like securitization, like Professor made reference to. Laws that were established that will bundle the mortgage industry, that will have brokers operating in the countries. Laws that will support insurance. Fiscal infrastructures like insurance companies established, brokerage companies established, fine-tune our pension. Those are fiscal institutions that will be in place before we could have a very viable housing process. But unfortunately, the existing institutions, they were not even talking to themselves. They work in silos. FHA does not know what FHA is doing. So we need to really, apart from establishing necessary institutions, existing institutions must be integrated. I was in South Africa in 2008. We got to the Housing Finance Corporation. They told us that the country wanted to deliver 2 million housing units in the next 4 years. This is our role. We got to their building organizations. They told us the nation wanted to develop 2 million houses. This is our role. The land registry, the land bank, this is our role. Everyone have roles to play. And I'm thinking post COVID-19, moving forward, These organizations must be redefined, re-engineered. They must have spelled out mandates. And I mean, in Nigeria today, you see a PMI having sites, building directly, competing with Redan. So how can it work? PMI is to provide fund, is to provide a mortgage loan. You see organizations competing rather than cooperating. All this we have to put an end to. FHA must know this is my role. NMRC must know this is my role. And they must be talking. This national assignment of providing 4 million houses in the next 5 years, what is my role? What am I bringing on board? We are meeting regularly and we are resolving this. That is cooperation, not competition. That's the only way forward. Every institution must know. They must be well defined. They must remain within their own boundary, within their mandate, and complement other. Not that when Redan is working with FMBN must be able to say these are things we are not doing right. And by not doing this thing right, we will not be able to deliver on the 2 million or 4 million housing of the government. So, existing institutions, laws that have to be passed. Institutions must be redefined, re-engineered, and they must be working as a system, as a car engine. No one can take over in any car. The ignition will not take over the work of carburetor. So we must work. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
I want to thank the two professors. They've done very well. We appreciate you. Much has been said about the establishment of institutions. And much has also been said about the need for the institutions that are already in existence to work together as partners and not as competitors. And you have also spoken about some of the outstanding bills. I'm sure we have 2 or 3 senators that are connected to this discussion. I think after the end of this program, we should be able to remind them of these outstanding bills. Thank you, my Professor Nubi. Thank you. Now, it's my pleasure to also invite the president of Nigeria, of Real Estate Developers Association of Nigeria, Alhaji Aliyu Wamako, to speak on post-COVID-19. How should the private sector respond to fulfilling affordable housing demand? What really is the role of government in providing affordable housing at this crucial time? Alhaji Aliyu Wamako, you are welcome.
Welcome. Thank you so much, Festus Adebayo. I equally salute all speakers in house. The importance of housing in post-COVID has been re-emphasized by this pandemic, because globally it is now been the best remedy or solution to neutralize the spread of the scourge for the citizenry to stay at home. With the acute deficit of housing in Nigeria, about 20 million units, apparently the housing should be given higher priority by the government at all levels and the private sectors practitioners. For instance, members of our own organization, Association Redan, as the co-providers of homes, are more than ever before aware of the enormous responsibilities ahead of us. Our members will be sensitized to bring their resources in form of land, finance, and capability towards increasing the quantity of housing for all strata of citizens, especially the less privileged. Redan will use its governance structure across the zones and state chapters to get more houses built. We are going to leverage on the Redan Anchor Developer Scheme, which we created alongside with our immediate first president, Reverend Ogechime, so that we will leverage on the capability of our members Those who have land, who has finance, will come together to be able to upscale the housing development. Redden has also come up with the Buhari Housing Scheme Development Initiative, where a minimum of 100 housing units shall be built in each of the 774 local governments in the country. We can equally engage the state governments to allocate and land directly to our members to reduce the cost of housing development. Government shall also, at the federal level, bring out policies to ensure increase in the housing stock. Government shall make available their land to the private developers under the model of the PPP arrangement, so as to increase the housing stock. At the state level, government shall allocate land directly to rate members to reduce cost of building. State government shall provide infrastructure to allocate lands for housing development instead of burdening developers to provide both primary and secondary infrastructures. State government shall reduce cost of permit for development. Also, they shall accelerate the issuance of title documentations to enable mortgages to be created upon developing those houses. There shall be holistic development by government to ensure even houses that are being developed in the urban or rural areas, so that it will reduce the migration of people from rural areas to urban areas, and also reduce the slums for those of the rural areas who have already found themselves in the city, so that they can reduce the slums. We equally feel that the government should also collaborate with all stakeholders in the housing value chain. Need to synchronize the effort for housing development. Policy guidelines should be collectively assessed to ensure compliance and implementation. Regular evaluation of roles be endeavored. This calls for common fora of critical stakeholders to actualize, to articulate issues and common solutions.
Try to round up.
We feel that it is the responsibility of the financial institutions and the federal government to come up with a solution by to reduce the cost of building land, and also get off-takers right from the demand side, so that at least it will synergize, the whole issue will go in conformity with what is supposed to be done. Thank you very much. I submit.
President, Real Estate Developer Association of Nigeria. For participants outside Nigeria, Real Estate Developers Association is an umbrella body of real estate developers in Nigeria, the practitioners who are into real estate businesses. We are private sector organization. So we say thank you to you, Alhaji Iyangete.
The quality and quantity of available housing stock in any country measures the development and quality of life of her people. On housing development, I make it my top priority to bring to you trending housing information and day-to-day housing plight of Nigerians.
If me as a civil servant working for my country cannot get access to housing loan, I don't know what else we can do.
Can you imagine that somebody will pay for 2 years rent and he's not sure of the next 3 months money in his pocket?
I also analyze the housing policies and strategies of government with stakeholders.
Let the federal government next level be seen in the area of housing. Nigeria deserves to be housed.
Housing issue is a journey of 1,000 miles. I don't think that anybody can pretend that we're going to close the 17 million homes gap in 5 years.
Housing development is your one-stop source for housing information. Join me.
Now, we have started receiving questions from some of the participants who are online. Please feel free to send your questions. And apart from that, we have some questions that are already online, where you just pick yes or you pick no. Those questions should please be responded to. They are very important for this, for the decisions at the end of this discussion. At this point, permit me to invite architect Jumoke Akinwumi, a very experienced affordable housing expert who has been a special advisor to the executive governor of Ogun State, and who have also managed a state-owned housing corporation. And we can report she did very well. That is why we also decided to bring her to this discussion. Architect Jumoke's focus will be on housing sector. Is entering a new normal. How would this look like? What significant changes do we expect to deal with? So you are welcome, Architect Jumoke. It's a pleasure to have you. Just 4 minutes presentation to start with.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Adebayo, the convener, and my co-panelists. When you introduced me earlier, you didn't speak to what I will be talking about. So very briefly, I'll be discussing the issues around what our sector would look like post-COVID. It's going to be, how should we say it now, the new order of things for us. I think that fundamentally, a few of the speakers have discussed issues around institutionalization, but I think we have to understand that the crisis itself has spoken to the frailty of even the most robust of institutions, as we've seen across the world. And it appears to me, as Professor Iyangete earlier mentioned, that if institutions do not have at the heart of it people, then we'll be subject to failing again and again. Now, this crisis also stresses the importance and the relationship between housing and healthcare. I think for many of us, we probably thought of it as a tangential relationship, but as a matter of fact, it is so critical. And the outcomes of and the events and the reports that we have seen, say in New York and in other states in America, that shows how the seemingly disenfranchised are more affected by the virus, and the impact of the virus is clear. And some of that is easily traceable to the quality is going to impact how we live, especially in urban areas. I think just looking ahead as to what are the things that would happen or should happen going forward, I think the first thing is that suddenly the health criteria will become very important in our standard definition of the criteria surrounding housing generally, and in particular affordable housing. So I suspect that in a short time to come, there'll be new industry safeguards, and that, of course, would have implications on design, on material, climatology, which many of us studied in school, but haven't really put to work. It'll start becoming important, orientation and solar and thermal requirements and so on. I also see that it will probably start having conversation as to whether we're supposed to be growing laterally or vertically. I mean, these are conversations we've had, but not really within the context of health and healthcare. It's often easy when we discuss affordable housing, particularly in Nigeria, that we're talking about spreading. But the reality is that if land is a valuable asset, then we have to think about vertical growth. And then we have to realize that our urban areas have to have green lawns.
At this point, permit me to call on Reverend Savio Goshuku Shimen. The man who have done very well in the area of real estate development, and immediate past president of Real Estate Developers Association Nigeria, former chairman of Enugu Chamber. I think it's time for us to hear from you, and the focus from you will be on appraising the existing institution. That has become an issue. Professor Iyangete has said something about them. Professor Nubi has said something about them. So we need to look into that, appraising existing institutions, the structures, interface, transaction dynamics, etc., etc. At this crucial time that we are approaching the intervention from the Central Bank of Nigeria. Reverend Shime, please.
Oh, thank you, Festus, and thank you, my co-panelists, for this privilege. I've heard from my sister Jumoke, and then also from my president and the two professors. I'd like to just mention two things that have come out for me while making his opening statement. Professor Charles Iyangete said that the era of imposed policy must come to an end. And I took up that from what he said. It was late Abiola that said, I don't shave a man's head in absentia. And that is something that we have to look at. When you look at the existing institutions and structures, many of the failures we have had on the part of critical institutions, development finance institutions, and some of the other players in the sector came as a result of poor institutional transaction dynamics. Now, and that has affected most of the things and colored most of the transactions we are doing. I take one example. We are talking of central bank investment, but I like to posit that we need that investment, but also we need to unlock the multiples of trillions that are lying in debt capital in form of land, residential accommodations that have no title. When Prof was speaking, he mentioned the fact that we have concentrated on physical infrastructure without mentioning the legal infrastructure and the physical infrastructure. There has to be a weaving together of these three components for us to get out what we require. They have not been harmonized. The interface, existence, collaboration that should exist between physical infrastructure, legal infrastructure, and physical infrastructure is non-existent. And that is why we are working in silos. I'll give you an instance. Professor Iyangete, about 4 years ago, in one of his papers, mentioned that we have about 34% as the transaction cost for any development on land. PwC did their own studies, and they came out with about 12 procedures and 105 days for registration. We have looked away from the impact of land administration as a key factor. Some years ago, we were trying to entice Shelter Africa to come in and invest, especially in Abuja. When they looked at Aegis and some other institutions there, and looked at the time it takes, the transaction time and the transaction cost, it does not aid investors. It does not engender confidence in investors to put in money into our real estate sector. So what is this supposed to be done? What we need to do, number one, is to make sure that the model mortgage and foreclosure law that has been endorsed by CBN and the National Housing Finance Program is domesticated in all the states with a view to reducing the transaction time and transaction costs and giving assurance to investors, whether they be house owners who are required to collect their rent, or whether they be mortgage companies who are giving out mortgages to people, that they will get back their money without undue litigation costs on time. This is very critical. When we do that, the huge debt capital that we have that runs into trillions will be liberated. Number two, you find out that within our sector, we have a lot of houses, we have a lot of completed estates which people could not get mortgage. So whereas we are thinking of new ones, the asset, the financing is trapped in existing structures. We also need to look at the transaction value chain and find out how we can work collaboratively. We find a situation that some few years ago, we began to work together on the issue of data. We found out that we've been crying about data, and we created in conjunction with CBN, created in conjunction with Redan and Federal Ministry of Works and Housing, what we call Nigerian Real Estate Data Collection and Management Program, with a view to working with other agencies, National Population Commission, National Bureau of Statistics, and we are able to get out data on 4 critical areas: data on land administration, data on businesses that are involved in real estate sector. We're able to also get data on housing development index, housing condition survey, and get data on affordability. These 4 sets of data are what every other person needs. So we need to look at 3 core areas. we have to look at the institutions that are operating in the mortgage arm and see how to synchronize them together. For now, I have heard a lot of vibe being made that we should not invest in Federal Mortgage Bank. Federal Mortgage Bank is sitting on 5 million contributors. They have database of about 5 million contributors. They have network across the whole country. We like to create new systems that are untried rather than improving existing system. For instance, you mentioned, Mr. Festus, about the CBN intervention. The funds that should go for mortgage to be able to create mortgages for houses that are already existing, and the assets and the finance is trapped in the hand of the investor. It's dead capital. We need to have substantial amount of money invested in Federal Mortgage Bank, but not given to them because they need to restructure Federal Mortgage Bank. But a special program similar to what they did in 2012, wherein Federal Mortgage Bank was working in harmony with Federal Ministry of Housing and Urban Development. But in this particular case, if CBN is to give money for intervention in the mortgage sector, they should get other critical institutions to be able to strengthen the governance structure of Federal Mortgage Bank. By having this fund domiciled in Federal Mortgage Bank, but Family Homes Fund should be part of the governance. Other institutions like AFDB, even Shelter Afrique, so that they can bring to bear an improvement in the structure that will give them confidence to be able to bring money in the future. If we are able to do this, we use this money as a seed capital and be able to get these other critical institutions, like including NMRC, to make the desired input so that can be a test of what will happen when we work collaboratively on the mortgage arm, so that any set of funds, they will know that they have an exit strategy in place. Also, I do think that we must work together to make sure that the intervention set of conditions where the same group involving Federal Mortgage Bank, Family Homes Fund, Mortgage Bank Association of Nigeria, Real Estate Developers Association of Nigeria must come together and sit down together and draw up a roadmap that will be efficient to be able to manage that intervention in the construction arm. About 18 years ago, or I think 16 years ago, Professor Akin Mabogunje, who was then the chairman of the technical board of Federal Mortgage Bank of Nigeria, gave us a scenario that is still a model that we should try out any day. Within the board of that Federal Mortgage Bank, they had directors who were leased out to interface with the critical stakeholders. We do know that Mr. David Gamba was to interface with Redan. We do know that Architect Agoka was supposed to interface with the Building Material Producers Association of Nigeria. We also knew that Fortunabia was to interface with Mortgage Bankers Association of Nigeria, so that the work, the challenges, the policies of these critical institutions were brought into the boardroom of Federal Mortgage Bank for decision making. I think that this collaboration will create a very novel idea. Finally, I'd like to also mention, Professor Iyangete mentioned about it. I've been asking that we must have a National Housing Council. Currently, we have a National Council on Housing that is domesticated in the Ministry of Works. That is made up of construction industry professionals. The 7 construction industry professional groups make it up. A bird cannot fly with one wing. Therefore, for us to have a very holistic National Housing Council, it should have the mortgage arm, it should have the construction arm, it should have other arms like the legal entities that make up, so that we can have a one-stop shop where we can have a very well-diagnosed decision on how we must tackle this issue very well. When we do that, we will be able to sit down together and be able to dimension the challenges, dimension the risk, and without loss of time, develop workable solutions that will be a sustainable program for the industry. So I'm of the view that we should have that National Housing Council instead of having this parochial National Council on Housing that is only made up of one wing and no bird can fly with one wing. I'm just taking what Prof mentioned so many years ago. So that is one critical area that we have to do. And when we do that and collaborate with one another, we'll have a very much workable way.
Thank
so
you.
that the criticism that we're having of each other, Federal Mortgage Bank is not doing well, this one is not doing well. The news.
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Shime. Thank you. God bless you. At this point, permit me to invite our colleague, very passionate about housing, Aluta Continua, my friend, my brother, Mr. Andrew Sipola, the Chief Executive of Shelter Africa. He will be talking not only about Nigeria this time, you have to talk about Africa generally. Are we meeting the United Nations standard for adequate housing, especially after this COVID-19 survivor? Then, role of DFIs in supporting affordable housing delivery. We'd like to hear from him. Mr. Andrew, you are welcome. It's your turn.
Thank you very much, Barrister Festus. I just feel like I'm one big family, and I appreciate being invited to this very auspicious webinar. And to the esteemed panelists, I just want to take this opportunity to greet you all. Barrister Festus, I only have a complaint that I'm the only one wearing a tie. Is it because maybe we were independent last as a country and I can't shake off the shackles of colonialism? I don't know, but I'll reflect on that. So just getting into the crux of today's discussion, I think from a United Nations point of view, I think the answer is very clear. Even before COVID, we were not meeting the aspirations of the United Nations in terms of ensuring that every African has access to decent and affordable housing. That is a constitutional right in many constitutions in Africa, but beyond that, that is also a basic human right. Now, of course, we are with fellow professionals and experts in housing, but maybe for those that are listening into the webinar, the United Nations actually crystallizes its aspirations for housing in Africa through the Sustainable Development Goal 11. And in the Sustainable Development Goal 11, the target is clear that in Africa by 2030, all Africans should have access to adequate, safe, affordable housing. And when we look at the current situation in Africa, that currently is a pipe dream. However, that doesn't mean that we can't make strides towards closing that gap. Why is that so? I mean, we've heard from our esteemed professors how this has originated, but if I may just take the opportunity just to take you through some statistics. When you look at Africa and the percentage of, let's call it urbanization in Africa. Now, currently, using the statistics in 2010, 10% of the world population, 10% were living in the Africa urban areas. And the projections being muted out by the United Nations is by at least by 2050, that is going to double. Now, why are people moving to the urban areas? Of course, that is because of opportunities. Now, the challenge we're having, and we know, is that the rate at which houses are being provided, particularly affordable houses, is lower than the rate at which the urbanization is taking place. Africa, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, is of course experiencing the highest rate of urbanization. Now, without a commensurate provision of housing, it means then that there is a proliferation of slums, as we all know, which leads to one of the centers of excellence within Shelter Africa, Center of Excellence, where they've projected the shortage of housing throughout the African continent at 56 million units. if you were to quantify that in generic terms, at 30,000 a unit, you need at least about $3 trillion to resolve that shortage of housing. So this leads me to the issue of the role of DFIs, and I'm fortunate, together with my brother Femi, to have been involved with one of the biggest African developmental financial institutions after the African Development Bank, which is Charles Iyangete, operating currently in 44 countries within the African continent. Now, DFIs are very specific in that if you look at the breakdown, a developmental financial institution cannot be the same as a normal commercial bank. A developmental financial institution must take risk. A developmental financial institution must utilize the capital that it has at its disposal to catalyze private capital into housing. And I have to say that with developmental financial institutions, what we're looking for in terms of the role in supporting affordable housing is an attitudinal change. We cannot blame institutions, but we have to blame the individuals. What I'm saying, to just clarify that, is that we need to have people that work in those institutions, including Shelter Afrique, that actually believe in wanting to make a change. They want to bridge the gap. DFIs cannot transfer problems. When we look at where we are now, we're looking at DFIs to support governments in terms of playing an advocacy role, in terms of capacity building. We're looking at DFIs, looking at the problem that developers have across the continent. And in most cases, when developers go to banks, what the challenge they have is the percentage that they need to put down in terms of their sweat capital. And we are looking at DFIs that hopefully can actually go in and provide that sweat capital to those developers, so that that can be used to now catalyze the funding, from the commercial banks. I guess what we are saying here is that DFIs generically are set up to be able to address market failure. And clearly, with the deficit of housing that we are seeing on the African continent, that actually increases the role of DFIs, not only in the provision of innovative financial solutions that can address the challenge, whether it's on the demand side of housing or the supply side of housing. On the supply side, financing that can actually track the construction life cycle, modeling that allows the developers to be able to build and complete the units without being pushed into default purely because the finance being provided does not match the construction life cycle. Financing on a wholesale basis to the banks that also provide, as been mentioned, the mortgage loans. And above all, there are certain things that are very critical where the DFI cannot pass those risks or challenges to those institutions or intermediaries that are intervening on the housing side. So we as DFIs need to look for innovative solutions that provide longer term capital at competitive rates, and more importantly, in local currency terms, to be able to deal with the issue of exchange differences. So I think, Barrister Festus, this is more or less on an overall basis from us. And I think what we are really saying here is that we as DFIs need to have that moral conviction and commitment to provide workable, pragmatic solutions that can actually make a difference and catalyze funding from global institutions and also private capital to drive foreign direct investment into Africa to help resolve the challenge of the 56 million housing deficit. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Andrew, the MDC executive of Shelter. We are very grateful to you all the way from Kenya. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Now, a lot has been said by the MD of Shelter Afrique. I hope all the media crew that are online are monitoring. And we have just put on a list of questions on the online for people to answer, to just ensure that they fill it before they leave. That's some of the questions. I can see them here now, about 10 questions. You either tick yes or no. And I need to acknowledge that I've received over 20 questions from the participants all over. We will see what we can do to some of the questions before the end of the webinar. At this point, permit me to invite the Pioneer Chief Executive of UPDC and the founder, the main man of Esimia Reality, my own vibrant brother, Akim Oguniro. He will be talking about the crisis in perspective. And he will also be talking about dealing with institutional and regulatory constraints. How do we need to do things differently? Adequacy of the policy response to the housing crisis at this very crucial time. Mr. Oguniro Akim, you are welcome, sir.
Okay, thank you, Festus, and thank you, everybody. I was hoping that you would call me last, so I will just summarize what everybody has said, and I will just move on. I think let's just put the issues in context about this crisis. Like the speakers have said, even before COVID-19, we all know that housing has been in crisis in Nigeria, in this country. And let's recall that last year, the UN Rapporteur on Adequate Housing came September 2019, Leilani Farah, and if you read her report, she said a whole lot of things, but there are 30 things that are very striking to me. The first thing she said was that the conditions she saw, she visited Lagos, Abuja, and Port Harcourt, and she said that the conditions that she saw were the most terrible she had seen anywhere in the world. She said people in informal settlements, they were living in most extreme inhuman conditions. And then she spoke about government, that we make grandiose statements, but we don't follow it up with action. So clearly housing is in crisis, and the reason is very simple. Home ownership penetration in Nigeria is less than 25%. And so you can imagine what will happen if you compare with countries like Romania that has like 96% and other countries. So clearly we're in a crisis. And we also must understand that during and post-COVID 2019, we have to move from rhetoric and really do things a whole lot differently. Now, in terms of what I think we need to do, there's been a whole lot of suggestions on funding and things like that. I've always said that if we must change the narrative for housing provision in Nigeria, two things must happen. Number one, we have to commoditize housing. We have to create a legal and regulatory framework that allows us to buy, sell, and transfer houses the same way you sell or buy any other commodity. A situation where it takes months and years and sometimes several years to transfer will just not help the system. We need to commoditize housing. So all the institutional and legal constraints, the Land Use Act, consent provisions, all those things, we need to, and everybody must understand now that this is business unusual. It's no longer a case of somebody just sitting somewhere, additional regulations which should not allow us to move. So we must commoditize housing by dealing with all those institutional bottlenecks. Secondly, we're still building houses. We have to start manufacturing houses. If you look at the National Housing Policy, it has 3 legs. One of the legs spoke clearly to infusing technology in the process of housing delivery. But today we are still calling Baba Sharafa and Baba Toib and Alimi and whatever to deliver houses for us. How many houses are we able to deliver? With due respect to the current government, in 5 years, I'm not sure they have delivered 20,000 houses. I'll be very surprised even if they have delivered 10,000 houses. So when you have that situation, how do you deal with the deficit? How do you deal with the deficit that we all brandish all over the place? So that to me is the reality of the matter. Now, let's talk about the policy response. Now, before 2020 started on a very good note for real estate and housing sector, the reason is simple. We've had very strong regulatory and macro buildup, which was very favorable to the sector. We recall that in 2018, there was the pioneer status legislation, which elevated housing and real estate to the highest level I've ever seen. Then last year, we had the Finance Act, which also helped to solve the issue around double taxation for REITs. And everybody was just happy. And then the crash of interest rates, the crash of yield on alternative asset classes. And for the first time, it appeared that housing and real estate has a fighting chance in competing against this other alternative asset class. But all that is gone now. You know, we've seen what CBN has tried to do. What is very worrisome to me is that I'm not sure whether CBN is the appropriate institution to lead what they are trying to do. What is the role of CBN? If you look at the UK, the housing secretary came on the television and said, these are the things I'm going to do. I've approved £800 million for this. I have approved £1.2 billion for this. This is how we're going to spend this money. Now, it's a bit awkward to me, you know, that CBN that will want to say that we'll do this, we'll do this. Okay, if CBN is part of the team that will lead the initiative, that should be okay. But how do we, and then if you look at there are two specific things that they've tried to do now. If you look at the 50 billion fund, you know, housing is not included in the list of businesses that benefit. Housing is not included. You know, so it shows that we still do a lot of talking, but we still have not recognized that there's a serious crisis that we must pay particular attention to. You know, if you look at the other leg, the Infraco PLC, 1.5 trillion naira. I'm just wondering where that money is going to come from with oil price now at $11 and all the problems that we have. But even at that, you'll see that when the CBN was talking about other sectors, they will say, we have allocated 100 billion naira, we have allocated 500 billion naira. When it came to housing and real estate, just say, we will do this, we will support this, we will support that. You know, so there's a lot of talk. And you know, as they say, talk is very cheap. You know, I think let me just stop for now, and then we'll revisit later.
Now, let me not take the last speaker. And there's no other person than the Managing Director, Chief Executive of Family Home Funds, Mr. Femi Adewale. He will be talking to us, and he will talk to us more so in the area of imperative for successful housing intervention programs. And what do you consider to be the future of housing post-COVID-19, Mr. Adewale? Key drivers of affordable housing, lesson from other jurisdictions. You are welcome.
Okay, thank you. I think it's good afternoon to colleagues, especially my brother from Nairobi. Very interesting discussion. I think a lot of it has been said. What I just really like to do is perhaps to give a broad concept that wraps up all of those four things that the moderator has asked me to speak about. But what I really like to do is to make 3 points. And the first one is perhaps setting the context for what is likely to be the housing environment, or the environment in which any housing delivery will play in the foreseeable future. I hate to be the bearer of good news, but the fact is that unless housing changes its messaging, the foreseeable future will really be very, very difficult one. It will really, really struggle. It will struggle for capital, and I think it's almost certainly going to struggle to get any serious public policy attention, the kind of attention you need to execute on some of the brilliant ideas that you have all suggested. Now, why do I say that? Look, we all know, not just for Nigeria, but perhaps the entire African country, that post-COVID, I think we're going to get hit. We're going to get hit badly, some more than others. Certainly Nigeria will get hit. The focus currently is on oil, but actually our export business, the commodity export, will also get hit because the buyers are not buying. So there's a big double whammy for the economy. On the back of that, the very limited and diminishing government resources is likely to go firefighting around key urgent areas. We're talking about youth employment that's skyrocketing across the country. That is likely to be the priority of government. Manufacturing, absolutely critical to stem outward flow of foreign exchange. So government is going to have some very big, high-level objectives. And except housing can somehow find its way into keying into those broad objectives, is not going to get any attention at all. It's not going to get any attention at all. But I think out of that challenge comes an amazing opportunity, because we know that outside of agriculture, in fact, I say beyond agriculture, there is no better market sector or economic sector that can create jobs as fast as housing construction, and this construction sector particularly. So we estimate that, for example, for every unit of housing that's produced, you can create between 4 to 6 jobs. So let's say we have a program of 300,000 homes per annum in Nigeria, spread across all of the 36 states, spread wide, say, across 3,000 developers, which means that every one of them is doing 100,000 homes a year, which is realistic, okay? That over a 5-year period will bring 10 million people into employment, earning about 60,000 naira a month, which is double our current minimum wage. That is a possible, and I think unless we start telling our story like that, all of the public policy attention that housing needs to take the next step forward is unlikely to happen. And what about manufacturing? In 2018, just under 1 trillion naira was spent in importing building components into Nigeria, from doors to ceramics to chemicals. We're not going to have that foreign exchange anymore. There's going to be a lot of pressure on inflation, a lot of pressure on the naira. Again, housing has a fantastic opportunity, and its players have a fantastic opportunity to jumpstart many of our moribund manufacturing units that have been kicked out of business by imports from China. I think that is what the post-pandemic future must look like. That is what we must look like. And if we're going to have a change, we need to be looking at how do we align with what is likely to be the economic priorities for government, not just in Nigeria, but across the sector. We are housing people, so naturally we have a conflict of interest. But this is more than housing. It's significantly more than housing. Housing really is only a means to an end. And except we show that housing can be a conduit to that end, I don't see that it has a significant future. Now, the second point I'd like to make is this, is about what are the imperatives for a successful housing intervention. I think my colleagues have mentioned a whole raft of possible interventions, possible initiatives, and I totally agree with all of them. But again, let us kind of step it up a little bit. All of those things that we can do only exist everywhere that a housing market works across the world, where you have a functioning and effective ecosystem. Housing is more than housing. Housing is about planning, is about land, is about capital markets, is about manufacturing, is about a whole range of things, about people. We somehow need to find a way to construct an ecosystem that works. And that starts from a diagnostics. What are the big gaps in our current ecosystem. Where are the gaps that are not served? Where are the gaps that are served but are not functioning efficiently? And that is where I will agree with Professor Iyangete. I've never been a fan of new institutions, but I think that a totally independent, holistic, intelligent, credible body that can do this diagnostic for us is absolutely critical. I think one of the big things we can take out of the current situation, hopefully it has touched our hearts, hopefully it has kind of given us a sense of our own vulnerability, is perhaps to say, okay, perhaps let's put a stop. Let's reconstruct. Okay, let us reconstruct. And I think to reconstruct, you need to have a strong diagnosis. What is working and what is not working well? And what is not working well, what are the specific actions that we can do to address it? Almost all of our housing-related policies and legislation, some of them are about 30 years old. Are we saying that the thinking of 1980 and the thinking of 1970 can serve us in 2020? Absolutely not. There's no industry that is working like that. So I think it's a time for rethinking. And if the arrowhead of that rethinking towards creating an ecosystem that works is a housing commission, so be it. But we need to find the right people, the right person to actually carry that diagnosis. At the moment, we're doing a babalawo kind of medicine, just throw different kinds of solutions at the problem. Diagnostics is key. What is working and what is not working. And what is not working, let's fix it. Where there are gaps, let's put a new player in there. That's my second point. The third one is a bit softer. It's really, I say, about patience and managing expectations. I sense that in Nigeria, but perhaps across Africa too, we're in a hurry. Assuming the housing deficit is 17 million, and there's a lot of doubt about that, we're not going to fix this problem in a year, in 2 years, in 3 years. And I sense that this hurry makes us too hard on ourselves. It doesn't help us to have what I think is a supportive environment for development and continuous improvement. The problem we have in housing is not going to go away quickly. It will take time to resolve, and what is required to do it is a deliberate, dispassionate planning. Okay? It may take us 5-8 years before we make a significant headway, but let us be heading in the right direction. Let us be heading in the right direction. When I started my housing career in England in 1991, the housing sector in England was nothing like what it is today. In fact, it was perhaps only slightly better than what we have in Nigeria. Okay, but through series of continuous improvements, my organization, we have a lot to improve. I think FMBM has a lot to improve. We can all improve, but let's not destroy these organizations. Let us say, let us be patient with them, because some of them are working in extremely difficult circumstances. It's about what can we do to help them to take the next level. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Femi Adewale. I'm sure some people are going to accuse me that you spend beyond the normal agreed time. I know why I did that, because I will not give you the third or fourth opportunity. So, and I wanted to just open up once and for all. However, you still have to remain here. So, I want to say a very big thank you to you.
The quality and quantity of available housing stock in any country measures the development and quality of life of her people. On housing development, I make it my top priority to bring to you trending housing information and day-to-day housing plight of Nigerians.
If me as a civil servant working for my country cannot get access to housing loan, I don't know what else we can do.
Can you imagine that somebody will pay for 2 years rent and he's not sure of the next 3 months money in his pocket.
Also analyze the housing policies and strategies of government with stakeholders.
Let the federal government next level be seen in the area of housing. Nigerians deserve to be housed.
Housing issue is a journey of 1,000 miles. I don't think that anybody can pretend that we're going to close the 17 million homes gap in 5 years.
Housing Development is your one-stop source for housing information. Join me.
I have received over 30 questions here. I want to believe that some of the participants will bear with me. I will only take, with the highest respect to them, the most important questions there. And I found that our participants have been attending to our polls online. We appreciate you. We have received so much response. If you have not filled the form, please kindly fill it. Answer those questions. Please provide answers. As our panelists are providing answers, you also provide at your hand so that you can mark them together later, informing our decisions as far as this housing sector is concerned. I would like to look at this. Professor Iyangete, you are welcome back. It's your time. I'm going to bring you back for just 2 minutes, but with a question. Even though Mr. Femi Adewale has supported your motion, while some other speakers have not or did not. Please, sir, Professor Charles Iyangete, please, can you tell us what exactly you mean by this housing commission that you mentioned? Can you please just tell us in 2 minutes what you mean? That's a very sensitive area. I know a good number of the media who are connected to us we like to take away. Can you please explain to us what you mean by that? And how is it going to function? Are we not going to use human being there? Are they not going to be human being that will operate the place? Please tell us.
Absolutely. We need human beings in everything we're doing. And but we need human beings who are committed in a particular way to the intention and to the drive. The Housing Commission that I speak of is an independent body created by an instrument. Really, all it takes is an executive action of the president to create a commission. And the commission would have 3 critical roles in a coordinating capacity. First is to ensure that we have today's, and I mean today's 2020 and beyond, housing policy, a national housing policy that can address the real issues of today. The first-time homeowner is one of those that are struggling with getting access to funding for affordable housing. Social housing is another key policy area that needs to be addressed from a coordinated perspective. The second role is, as Femi clearly noted, is this role of developing and building a comprehensive housing economic model for Nigeria. We do not have that. You know, it would be all-encompassing, something that is driven by data, empirically built, one that really reflects the impact that housing can have on the economy in a way that you can generate new indices, you can create economic policy that you can say, here is the role of housing in that policy, and here's the impact of housing in that policy. We're still lacking that. I know my colleague at the university, Professor Nubi, may say otherwise. We may have some elements of it, but I think I want us to now have one that is all-encompassing. And the third is the monitoring role, monitoring and evaluation of how the housing sector is functioning. I know there's a question about, is this not a replication of the role of FMBN? Far from it. FMBN is the custodian and manager of the housing fund. FMBN is a mortgage finance institution. FMBN supports construction finance. That is far from what the Housing Commission would do. The people would be independently picked and to cover the whole range of the housing value chain. So that's the essence of it. You know, the essence is something that meets the challenges of today. Something that is, even in the choice and the picking of the people, is done through the sort of competitive process that I've spoken about. If you ever wanted to know about just how corruption has permeated our systems, read Okonjo-Iweala's book, Fighting Corruption is Dangerous, and you'll see just how deep it is. And so if we begin to create a commission that from the beginning looks to deal with those aspects of the capture of our institutions from the outset, we would have a fighting chance of being able to address the challenges of housing in a way that would deliver results. You know, if our institutions are not delivering, we need to make them deliver by really also creating structures that allow them to deliver. I'm not now advocating abolishing institutions or nothing of that kind. I'm saying we need a coordinating role, and that coordinating role will be by the Housing Commission. Thank you.
For all my colleagues, the participants and the media, we are not advocating for the abolition of any organization, but we are saying we need a neutral organization that can come at this very particular time, that can rescue us and attend to the needs of Nigerians, especially the low-income earners. Now, the question for Madam President, I have a question here for you. Alhaji Aliyu Wamako. The question is for you. The person wrote that, why is it that real estate developers, why is it that they don't produce houses that are within the affordability of the low-income earners? Houses of 4 million, 5 million, which is what those people that are really in need of houses are looking for. They want answer from the Redan president to please respond to this. And I think these are kind of houses we also need at the post-COVID-19. Affordable low-cost houses. How do Redan assist in this area? I think I have another question I want you to answer with it. The question is from Kaduna. The person is asking you, what is Redan doing in the area of foreclosure bill that are being in most of the House of Assemblies? What role is Redan playing here? That you should please tell the whole world. Alhaji Wamako, you are welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Festus Adebayo, moderator. First and foremost, let me answer the question from Kaduna. As rightly said by our esteemed MD, Mr. Hakim, there is no business that will exist without regulations or regularizing the business, at least to be to the test of the time. It is as a result of this, we have taken our battle to the National Assembly, where we have intimated, putting in all our districts together to present a real estate regulation bill, which inshallah very soon will present that to the National Assembly. And the people like Lere, who asked this question, can come and sit with us at the public hearing of this bill. We also want to.
How do you know it's Lere? How do you know it's Lere?
How do I know?
I only said the question came from Kaduna. I didn't mention the name.
How do I mention that?
Right on, my president.
First.
Right on, my president.
Okay. So, we have already put everything together to present our bill to the National Assembly. And more also, we believe in the geographical information system, which the Kaduna state government has already started. And we enjoin and call all the state governments to follow on the footsteps of Kaduna state, because it will make foreclosure very easy for the developers to do. Then your second question. Yes. I want you to understand that most of the houses that you find at 150 million, 200 million, some of them are not Redan members. That is why we took our battle and collaborate with the SCUMO, which is an arm of EFCC, to make sure that at least we regularize the industry and sanitize it for those kind of people who call themselves members and which they are not. And very soon, if not because of this COVID-19, believe me sincerely, all these things will have been exposed by this time around. But we are trying by all means to see that those people who are doing this kind of business hide under the cover of real estate developers and maybe to smuggle out some of the funds that are illegal based on terrorism and financial crisis in the country. We are willing unable to provide most of the information because our members, we believe in developing housing that are affordable to the low-income earners, and that is what we have been doing. That is why we collaborate with Federal Mortgage Bank. That is why we collaborate with Family Homes Funds, all in order to provide houses that are at a lower level of income. And even now, the one that I've told you, the 774 local government, most of these houses, none of them will be more than 6.5 million naira across the nation. So I believe the man that asked this question was mistaken hidden that are there who are trying to hide under the cover of it. Those guys are not our members, and we would not welcome.
Thank you. President.
Yeah.
Professor Timothy Nubi, yes, it's your time. I think, can you respond to that explanation?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
I hear you. I can hear you.
Okay.
There are
Yes.
so many.
I want to. Okay. I want to appreciate that concern. In the last 10 years, I have been presenting papers to other members to see slum upgrading as a way of business. It's a business. So I think post COVID, we'll see 19. We'll begin to look at the slums as something we can bring to our portfolio. And there's no way this can be done except various developers work with local government and the state government. And that's really takes me back to this issue of the commission. If there's only thing we can take out of this meeting, the establishment of the commission can help us to bring about this integration. And one thing I want to equally mention is the need to urgently embark upon the re-engineering, retrofitting of these institutions. One or two people have referred to it, but it's so urgent. Together with Femi Adewale, as far back as 2007, we worked for almost 1.5 years to re-engineer FHA. We did diagnosis analysis with KPMG. Federal government invested. But that is the way every institution must be diagnosed under this commission. And lastly, I want to mention that the resources for this, the question now is that we don't have money. We don't have money from petroleum. We don't have foreign direct investment. Where would money come from? And this made me to say we must begin to look inward. Yes, I agree with Femi that we have to be patient, but let us begin to look inward. Let me make reference to the pension fund. Pension fund is one of the biggest pots of fund in the history of this country. Pension fund law allows 40% of the fund to flow into real estate, but it can only be through mortgage-backed security and REITs. And because we have that underdeveloped, those two products underdeveloped in this country, we found that nothing is flowing into real estate through the pension fund. 40% of about 3 or 5 trillion naira is not a small fund. So we have to look at the fund. How can a professor in University of Lagos who is entitled to about 40-50 million upon retirement, how can he access part of his pension to fund his finance now? All these institutions must begin to think out of the box. Let us look at what we have. Money is no longer coming from abroad. Grant is no longer coming from World Bank. MFN is not giving us any money. What we have, the huge pot in the pension fund, let us grow our insurance. What are the source of funding we have in the country now? How can we remove the bottlenecks that makes this fund inaccessible? How do they run such funds in other clients? So we don't need to be overprotective so that this fund does not meet the need that they were set up to do. So those are things I believe we should begin to do. Let us concentrate on slum regeneration. Let us concentrate on re-engineering our institutions. Let's get the commission to make these institutions to work together, integrate them. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
This question goes to Mr. Kimbo Bunio. I think Redam presidents need to talk about this. Former president of Redam, Reverend Goshuku Shime, let's hear your side on what's the question from Seyilu Fadeju. And if you can also help me with this question. I got this message from somebody that most times there's a gap between the corporate talk and action when it comes to affordable housing. How can we make this corporate talk become a reality? That is the question. And I have another question from Taufik. Taufik is saying, how do we ensure proper matching of housing demand and supply? Former president of REDA, please, can you please respond to us? As we are,
thank you so much. First, what I would like to say is that I agree with the commission. On slum issues, let me say clearly that we have a duality in the country. As of today, the rich areas of this country have their infrastructure provided free of charge, while the poor masses in the slum areas and in the housing estates pay for their own house infrastructure. That is a duality we have to watch going forward. The issue of affordability and slum development goes together. Today, most of the landlords who have houses in those slums cannot afford through the rent to upgrade those houses because the rent is small, number two, and it doesn't come as often as it should come. So we have to assure the investors of their regular income or returns for their assets they have created by making sure that we watch the model mortgage and foreclosure law. Also, we have to create in place some of the multi-door court process which the legal system have brought up so that issues of 5 million naira and below can be handled expeditiously by some of these institutions. I do think concerning the issue of affordability is not, or the not the issue of affordability is a question of output parity. You cannot buy expensive cement or get expensive building materials, get very expensive high interest loan and create an affordable housing out of it. It's an issue of input-output parity. That is why the whole ecosystem, as mentioned by Mr. Femi Adeola, has to be watched. And that is why the commission mentioned by Charles Iyangete has to come in. And so that we can look at the whole ecosystem as one and be able to evaluate how we can ensure that there is parity and equity between input and output by all the stakeholders in the value chain. And that can only be done when we sit down together, not when we work in silos. And finally, I believe that what Prince was looking at is an idea also that we can bring some form of incentive so that the issue of slum redevelopment is not going to stand only on the issue of economics of it. There's also the security dimension that should come in. There's also the issue of health dimension. When we take care of the slums, outside of the issue of economics of its development, we'll then be able to bring some form of incentive, knowing that if we do this, we'll reduce the costs we're having on healthcare, we'll reduce the issue of insecurity that occurs in those slums. So government looking at the slums should not look at slum redevelopment only as an economic project, but as a project that should be holistic in terms of its impact on security, its impact on health. Many of those areas where we have those slums are the areas that will cost us very huge amount of money during this COVID-19 because they cannot practice social distancing. They cannot practice any of those things. So instead of waiting for the problem to be created, can we now look proactively at those slums and begin to make some investments, some reduction in transaction costs? We can ask the land administrators, the government, if anybody is involved in intervention in slums, can we remove the taxes? Can we reduce the cost of title perfection? Can we reduce the cost of building approval? This can become some institutional incentive for some developers to invest in these areas. They may not have high return on equity. Thank you.
You here?
Your phone is off. Okay.
Our phone is off?
Yeah.
How can our phone?
No, it's on now. It's on.
Architect Jumoke, are you with us? Architect Jumi?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
So, you know, you were making a presentation before, and we want to have, we should be rounding up in the next 15 minutes, and we need to hear from you. From the question I have here, there's a record that says that you have done well in the area of affordable housing, and you made some success stories. How did you make success stories? What are the factors that assisted you to deliver affordable housing? And what do you have to say about this new intervention from the government?
Okay, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. I think we have to look at it from the point of view of a huge dose of realism. There's certain data that we must be able to collect and aggregate. And so, for example, one of the first things that we will typically do is identify who the target market is and understand what their affordability is. And then you have to work backward. I mean, this is what will be called reverse engineering. And there's a lot of education as well involved, because people have to understand that based on your income today, this is, you might want a 5-bedroom palace somewhere, but truly based on your income today, this is what you can afford. And the lessons that came out of that was that people were absolutely accepting of what the product that they were able to afford, so long as we were able to create a community that was good. And so what I usually would say is that it is not even the house itself. It's actually the environment and the community that you create that makes sense. Because as circumstances improve, people can do what they want with their homes by way of extension or, you know, whatever else enhancements that they desire, as long as they can fund it. So it's more critical as we think about affordable housing for the future that we're talking about people's ability and what they can afford. And if the product is a 1-bedroom extendable to 3, so be it. But a lot of people don't even understand the connection between what's in their pocket or in their bank and what they can own. And that is left for us as practitioners to ensure that we do. The second thing also is that there's a lot of, I would use this word carefully, carelessness in the delivery process. And what has happened over time is that developers end up offloading the carelessness and the inefficiencies onto the end buyer. And there are ways that you can manage this. We've managed things up to lining up homes in a manner where the narrower side faces the road and the longer side away, because basic things like how many homes can I fit on a stretch or a kilometer of road? Because along your road, you also have all your services. There's also, how do we go about procuring this? One of the things somebody has mentioned is that housing has such a huge economic impact. And if we then decide that that is true, then what we should do is that our own little network, so there are many mom and pop construction companies that we can train. And when we design simply and buildability is at the forefront, then we're able to also create this platform that enables very small contractors participate in a build process. And in that process, they're also being trained, and they're also, you know, gaining knowledge as to how to build better. And at the end of the day, what you're creating is just a developing pool of potential builders. I think that those are the key things that were done in the 6 years that I spent in Ogun State that enabled us to achieve the results that we achieved. I mean, building hundreds of homes at the appropriate price point. And I mean, the success story for every developer is selling those homes very quickly.
Say about this intervention, what advice do you have? How do you think it should happen? How do you think
I think there's a lot that we ourselves have to do. I mean, one of the things that has happened for decades now is that we've ignored government, and whenever we do our projects, we are our own local government. So we're there providing, pooling the main supplies from wherever they are, creating everything. Government has a responsibility And that responsibility, we have to push back to government. I know that it is going to be a tough work, but if we don't do that, we will continue to end up in the same situations where individually or as companies, we are building things and we're building things in silos. That is not what makes for a livable community. And that is not what makes for proper urban living. We must be able to force government, and it will be tough, but they must do their bit. It is the responsibility of a government that functions that we have main supply everywhere. We go to Accra. My first visit in Accra was probably, 15, 18 years ago. And just along the road, I could see the point of entry of pipe bomb water. And I'm not talking about the Ikoyi equivalent of in Accra. I'm talking about, a normal neighborhood. And so why is it that when we develop, and then again, of course, we pass all these costs on to the poor end buyer, what government is supposed to provide, government must provide. And it's time that we come together and insist that that's what happens. That's what results in the network and in the ecosystem of functionality that we desire to have.
Thank you so much. Now I'm getting toward the end of the program. Now my questions here are for Akim Oguniro. The person asked, it looks as if those in charge of policy in government of this country are not interested in housing. So what do you think should be done for us to get more attention from them? The other question says, other than releasing money to housing sector, can government intervene through the regulation of the interest rates, create access to land? Would that not help everybody? That even if a driver has an access to land, he will build his house. And the most of the intervention they are talking about go to the hand of the elite. There are some of you are big men, and at the end of the day, the people down will not benefit from it. Mr. Ogunino, please, this up is for you. Intervention.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you very much. And I'm happy that you have hit all the big men on this panel except me. I'm, like I always say, I'm a retiree, I'm a pensioner. But I like to start from where Jumoke just stopped, because a lot of the time when we discuss housing and the role of government, people tend to misunderstand that private players are asking for handouts from government. I think that is far from it. Primarily, what I think we need, and that is why I agree with Jumoke absolutely, is that we need government to become a lot more responsible in creating the right environment that will facilitate housing delivery. Access to land without seeing land acquisition process as a revenue generating process. Most state governments today, they have imputed revenue generation philosophy into the process of land acquisition and title perfection. And that is a problem. So we need to, if you like, democratize access to land. We need to work on infrastructure, as mentioned, because typically today as a private developer, the cost of your infrastructure, standard infrastructure, is between 12 to 15% of your construction cost. Best practice is 2 to 3%. So when you have already expended 12 to 15% on extraneous costs, which government should have provided, it adds unnecessary cost to your funding. Now, let me say that the policymakers need to focus on the pain points of the segment. We need to focus on the pain points of the segment. When we do, I'll give you an example. Professor Nubi just mentioned the issue about REITs and whatever. I've been in that market. I've been on roadshows trying to raise funding for housing for several years. The reality of the matter is that the advocacy that we've been doing, is apparently hitting the right spots. That was why you find the amendment that you saw through the pioneer status legislation, and most recently what you find in the Nigerian Finance Act. And I think that with the provisions of Section 23 of the Finance Act 2019, it will be a lot easier, because it has dealt with the issue of double taxation for REITs and mortgage-backed securities. And I think that's the way to go. So I think that we shouldn't be tired. We should focus on creating this type of forum to really drive home our pain points, and to work. I mean, Femi mentioned the issue of obsolete legislation. Look at, since we have been talking about the Land Use Act. Land Use Act since 1978. Just imagine what has happened, the dynamism that has happened in the world in all these years. Yet we are still stuck with the provisions of the Land Use Act. So I think government needs to look at the sector. There's a state of emergency in the sector now. We need to do things differently. We need to act with urgency. We need to collaborate more. I always like to say that we should move from harmful competition to winning collaborations, both amongst the players, both with the government, and then we can create the right platform. Let us see ourselves as being on one team and trying to achieve goal congruence in tackling this endemic problem called affordable housing in Nigeria. That will be my view on what you have said.
Receiving a lot of commendations to various individuals among the panelists, and I want to say thank you to those who have been sending those commendations. I don't have enough time to bring them one by one, and I have one here for the MD of Shelter Afrique, Mr. Andrew. Are you here, Mr. Andrew?
Yes, definitely. I'm here. Definitely.
Yes. My question is to the MD of Shelter Afrique. Must the 56 million units needed be new built? A clear definition of what access to affordable, adequate housing is needed. I found that in Nigeria, this is interpreted as home ownership, which I believe is not what the SDG 11, that's 11, is meant to be. A rental framework where citizens can rent decent housing at a percentage no more than 30% of their income is often left out of the housing discourse in Nigeria. I would like you to make a response to this as far as Africa countries is concerned. Then I have another question for you that says that we keep hearing a lot of intervention from Shelter Afrique, but we are not seeing having information as far as the impact that intervention is making. How many houses, how many jobs has it been created? I mean, that's another question from somebody here. Intervention versus impact. Please, can you please explain?
Yeah. Thank you, Program Director. I think the first question, I would like to concur with the respondent to say that even though we talk of a shortage of 56 million, when you talk of access to housing, that definitely can include rental, as long as the house is decent and it's affordable. At times, we have the fixation that home ownership is the only panacea to actually resolve the housing crisis, but it's not. And I do believe that I think in terms of the strategies of most developers going forward, if they don't have adequate take-up because maybe mortgages, as been mentioned by the past president of RIDAN, Reverend Chime, they have to convert now into rental. Sometimes if you can't sell, you have to rent. You can't, it costs you more to leave the house unoccupied and paying for security charges, etc. So yes, I think it's a positive contribution, which we encourage even developers when they come in to access funding. However, if it's a purely rental project, of course the cash flows are different. You need more patient capital, purely because it's not a build and sell kind of scenario where you can do it with a loan of maybe a 4-year tenure. There you need probably even a 10-year tenure. In terms of Shelter Afrique, I would like to also agree with the second correspondent who's saying we keep hearing about Shelter Afrique, what it's doing, what is the actual impact. So we can only talk cumulatively, Program Director, to say cumulatively, since Shelter Afrique has been set up, which is now 38 years ago, what has actually been approved is in excess of $1.2 billion US, and then that takes you to projects, to the tune of 17,700. Of course, you can project the beneficiaries by multiplying by 4 or 5, but that is not the issue for us. I think the issue for us is not to dwell now in the past, but to dwell into the future, to say, how do we come up with innovative, as the panelists have been talking about, innovative ways of not building but manufacturing houses? How do we as Shelter Africa come up with innovative ways of financing those manufactured houses, and then more importantly also of coming up with an innovative finance product that enhances affordability, because across the globe and across the continent, the biggest challenge also is affordability. That's why you find that houses are built, but if they're too expensive, nobody can occupy them. And then the financing, if the interest rate is too high, nobody can access that type of financing. So I hope that clarifies that question, Program Director.
We want to end it. Mr. Femi will take a question, and after that question, I'll give you an opportunity to say your last word on this program, and you should not spend more than 1 minute. Now let me take Mr. Femi. Mr. Femi, this question is for you. I have it here. If you are giving 500 billion intervention fund for housing market in Nigeria, how will you apply it? I hope that person is not possible.
I will take it with me.
He already has more than 500 billion now.
Although I'm very
additional 500 billion.
But I honestly think that the big challenge in our housing value chain is the demand side. I think if I had 500 billion, I would apply it to various interventions in the demand side. That includes rental housing, that includes bolstering up mortgages, that includes supporting housing microfinance, that includes supporting some form of self-build models. I think that when you secure the demand side, typically the market will react to the supply side. And I must add, because I see Professor Nubi nodding, that part of the money will go towards slum upgrading. Thank you.
At the final point of this interaction, and I would like to start the way I started in the afternoon by Professor Iyangete to please say his last statement on this program for today. Professor Charles Iyangete.
Thank you. The Housing Commission is needed today, not tomorrow. We need it now because of where we are and the challenges going forward. The funding proposal that I gave, maybe we missed it. It's an irredeemable fund, 0 coupon, multiple foreign currency through an amnesty. That would do a great deal in addressing our social housing, social infrastructure, and economic development post this pandemic. And I'm just hoping that that message doesn't fall on deaf ears. There is way too much to do, and we must not fail the next generation of Nigerians. Thank you.
Timothy Nubi.
Me. Okay. Thank you so much for this opportunity again. Mr. Femi, what I was raising my hand was that we didn't mention capacity building and research. Data building, is the foundation for everything. This we must begin to run our system not as from guesswork, but we must be scientific, we must be critical, we must be analytical, and that is where research and capacity building comes in. My last thing, my parting recommendation is that, look, we've said wonderful things. Let's look inward. Let's rebuild. Someone mentioned rebuild. Let's rebuild our institutions. Let's rebuild our cities. Let's start from what we have. When Nigerians say we have housing deficit, and we want to resolve the 17 or 20 million deficit, let what comes to our mind no longer be new built. If majority of Nigerians were living in slum, and we've seen the effect of this epidemic mainly in the slummy and deprived neighborhood, let's start from there. Let's allocate funds. So when we talk of housing delivery, let's be multidimensional. Let's be talking of new builds, home upgrading, slum regeneration, cooperative people, teachers, police, Niger Delta. Let's bring everyone on board. We should not just focus on this new build, civil service, 10% of the population. Let's broaden it. Let's unbundle it. Let's look at integrated approach. How do we solve this whole picture?
Thank you.
Let's be sectorial. Let's be multidimensional. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you.
Architect Jumoke, 1 minute to go. Just 1 minute round off the statement.
All right, thank you. It looks like many of us want to spend.
Why?
What I would like to say really is that if we do not address these issues, I think that we have seen what has happened in other climes. The truth is that we're only as strong as the base layer of our population. And if they are not helped, then we truly don't even have an economy at all to speak to. I have to say this quickly about funding. There's been many suggestions about funding, but there are other ways. And one of the ways that I think is most is practical is that if you look, I mean, for example, Lagos State, we say, oh, you know, our land is oil and we don't have much land. But if you fly a drone over Lagos or you look at the shots of Lagos, you realize that this is about land management and also people holding on to assets that they're doing nothing with. I think it's time that people start to pay a tax on undeveloped land. And that money ought to go into a pool that addresses everything from some funding for social housing, some funding, as Professor Nubi requested, for studies, and so on and so forth. That, in a way, would contribute to how we address the issues that we're talking about today. Thank you.
Madam Architect Jumoke. Now, the next person, Jedo, the president of REDA. Are you here, sir? Your last word here. He was calling me a few minutes ago. Reverend Shime, please, let's have your last statement on this platform.
Okay, number one, I would like to agree with the issue of setting up of a commission that will bring all the players in one place and they will be able to define a roadmap that is sustainable across board, defining the input and output expectations and moderating them as they go. Number two, I don't think there's any need for us to have new institutions that will play in the sector. Let us link up a proper interface between existing institutions and restructure their governance structure and then improve the funding for them. Number three, we've been speaking about investment from outside, but I think there's a lot of debt capital that is in the sector as of today. Our mortgage contributes only 0.5% to our GDP. We can do more if we can liberate those debt capital. The number of estates that have been completed and people are looking for mortgage. So if we liberate money from oil is going, therefore we must look at this debt capital that is lying idle and be able to bring it into the equation. Thank you.
Please, your last statement on this program.
Okay, I mean, without repeating what people have said, I think we need to work on educating the people. Like Jumoke said, a lot of the time, people really they can't match their ambition, their pocket with their ambition. You know, everybody wants 2, 3-bedroom houses, all rooms en suite and things like that. And we all know that the cost of M&E is very high in these buildings. You know, so we need to educate. I took a deep study of the South African affordable housing market. They started from 40 square meter houses, they moved to 60 square meter houses, they moved to 80 square meter houses, and then moved to 120 square meter houses. I think we need to think a lot more creatively and try to ensure that we match what we give to people to match their ambition with their pocket. I also believe that the commission is essential because we need to aggregate the position of all stakeholders and work a lot more collaboratively, and that commission, please tell them that they should reserve money for funding and research and capacity building, because of my good friend, Professor Nubi. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Now, MD Shatta Afrique, your final statement on this program.
Thank you, Program Director. I think that I think COVID is a life and death situation. When you are faced with a life and death situation, the process you take to make decisions becomes different. You break down the barriers and you look at ways that people can work together. So our message is that as Africans, we have to collaborate at all fronts. We do support the Housing Commission formation, and I do believe that many of us are actually in privileged positions. They are blessed to be either in DFIs or working in areas where they provide their professional expertise. And I think we have a responsibility to cling together. Whether you're talking the African Development Bank, you're talking of our Nigerian brother and colleague, the President Adesina. So what we have to do is let's work together. Let's package projects together where it's not just slum upgrade, it's slum upgrade plus other affordable housing projects. And then let's either present those to ensure that they are funded. If we can't get funding from, for instance, the oil, the project itself, if it's viable, can attract levels of funding. And as DFIs, we can step in to take the risk so that we can leverage money from the private sector. And lastly, if we look at the world as a global village and we decide not to do anything, we will start to talk of the world as a global slum. I thank you, Program Director. I thank you.
Thank you, Mahende. Now, Mr. Fami, your last word, one sentence.
Not really. I think, honestly, I just want to add my voice to the bit about the Housing Commission, but just to clarify my own view about it. I think primarily, and at the start, it should mainly be a diagnostic and road making entity, i.e. should see what do we have, what don't we have, and define a path going forward towards creating an ecosystem that works. All of the other bits about implementation can follow on, but I honestly think, given where we are, that ought to be a time.
Well, we have come to the end of the webinar discussion on the affordable housing crisis post-COVID 2019. We want to say a very big thank you to you. We have just received an announcement here from Shatta Afrique that they are set to feed and take care of 3,000 families living in slum areas in the Federal Capital Territory. And I think arrangement is already on that subject matter. And I want to say well done to Shatta Afrique all the way in Kenya. You remember that some people are living in the slum in Nigeria here. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I want to say a very big thank you to all the very important personalities who have participated in this first webinar discussion on affordable housing. Thank you, Professor Iyangete. Thank you, Professor Timothy. Thank you, MD of Shatta Afrique. Thank you, Mr. Femi Adewale. Thank you, Mr. Akim Oguniro. Thank you, President of REDA. Thank you, Reverend Shime. Thank you, all the notable Architect Jumoke Akiwomi. I want to say a very big thank you to all of you for making this program a success. And I also want to thank all the participants, over 350 people connected. And I think the figure just reduced to 300. This is very fantastic. I want to appreciate you. I want to assure you that we'll be doing this once in a month for now. since the COVID-19 has said that we should avoid talking one by one, so we have to be using this one at least for the next 1 or 2, 3 months before we get out of the so-called COVID-19. Thank you to all the media houses, my colleague, my partner in AIT. I appreciate you people. Colleague in TVC and other media houses who have deemed it necessary to be part of this historic discussion on affordable housing in Nigeria. Thank you to all our friends, colleagues on our Housing Development Advocacy Network. We appreciate all of you. We wish to let you know that we have this video recorded, and if there's any person who is interested in having a clip, you can request for it at no cost. And by the grace of God, we shall be using some of the materials on this discussion in our television program and also on all our online activities. I want to say, please stay safe. We still need your contributions to housing development in Nigeria. We want to say, please stay at home and do more of online activities. Aluta continua, Victoria Asata. Say bye-bye to everyone.
The quality and quantity of available housing stock in any country measures the development and quality of life of her people. On housing development, I make it my top priority to bring to you trending housing information and day-to-day housing plight of Nigerians.
If me as a civil servant working for my country cannot get access to housing loan, I don't know what else we can do.
Can you imagine that somebody will pay for 2 years rent and he's not sure of the next 3 months money in his pocket?
I also analyze the housing policies and strategies of government with stakeholders.
Let the federal government next level be seen in the area of housing. Nigerians deserve to be housed.
Housing issue is a journey of 1,000 miles. I don't think that anybody can pretend that we're going to close the 17 million homes gap in 5 years.
Housing development is your one-stop source for housing information. Join me